One, and we are recording with Mr. David Stumpf, who is dishonest, saying that he's in Bali. I think we can all see that this is a sham, and I'm not sure if he can be trusted now because it's clearly a green screen, and he's trying to pull a fast one on us. Actually, ironically enough, wasn't it out in the Kwajalein Atoll? Isn't that where the MIRVs would hit when they were testing them?
Sometimes there and sometimes Oino Island or the Phoenix Islands.
Yeah.
So depending what their criteria were.
Yeah. For everybody listening, he's the author of Titan II, a history of a Cold War missile program. And today we are going into Minuteman, which I knew some about Titan II. I knew nothing about Minuteman. And I fear that Minuteman, your book, is even farther above my head than Titan II. I put it on Kindle and I had my iPad read it to me, and it took me like 2 days, but I knocked it out. And definitely above my head, but there were several things in there that really kind of stuck out to me. And again, I emphasized it last time when we talked about Titan 2, which everybody listening, go back like 30 episodes. The level of detail you put into these books, I mean, truly it's mind-boggling. These are the physician's desk reference for ICBMs. I mean, it truly is the one-stop shop. Like, could be the encyclopedia for it. But there's also some things in there that really just melted my mind. And from the covering of the radar absorbing material, the cloth that would go over it, to the EMP hardening that they would do in the silos, to the having to find what metal wouldn't melt because tungsten would even melt and reentry, and it's got the highest melting point, to the self-stabilizing fins, to the clouds of chaff, to the randomized trajectory of the third stage it would have, so it would act as a decoy, to the fins that would come out, and to the circular error probability. All just blew my mind. But maybe I wasn't paying attention enough. So I'll just grab on this and we can go from there. What did they end up using for the reentry vehicles if tungsten couldn't even do it? And does that fall under how last time you said you want to write a book on the reentry vehicles, but the Air Force talked you into not doing it?
Tungsten was only the tip of the RV.
Mm-hmm.
The main part of the RV was, depending on on the year and the model, the Mark V and Mark 11 were an ablative material, proprietary material through Avco. And then the 12 and the 21 are a carbon fiber buildup. Ironically, they showed me the equipment for building the carbon fiber, oriented carbon fiber, but they wouldn't show me their collection of model warheads, which is really odd. But the oriented strand carbon fibers is what the reentry vehicles are made out of now. At least the ones I'm aware of are made out of nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
They had trouble with the nose tips ablating asymmetrically, which caused problems with the accuracy of the reentry vehicle. And at one point, the phenolic tape they used, Refraseal tape they used to wrap the Mark 11, was done in such a manner that the quality control wasn't necessarily known at the time. And they had this wrapping in the wrong direction, and it caused the reentry vehicles to spin catastrophically. There was a small amount of spin, like a rifle bullet, to make it more accurate, but these things spun up well past their design limit and just disintegrated.
The one thing that really stuck out in my mind was you'd have the radar absorbing material on there to lower the RCS, or the radar cross section, and then you have for everybody listening, you have decoys because there's no atmosphere and space. Everything goes as if it is a projectile. So you'd have all these balloons that would kind of or inflatables that would look like multiple independent reentry vehicles. And then you talked about how, I thought it was kind of funny, it was like after a certain amount of, I guess, reentry, the radar cross section, the radar absorbing material would ablate. It would just burn because it was 6,000-7,000 degrees Fahrenheit coming in at Mach 20.
Right.
It would all blow away, and it would be an ionized ball, and it was very, very visible to radar. But at that point, it didn't matter.
Right. At that point, if they hadn't launched, it was against it. It was too late.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of funny in a dark way, but I mean, it's like turning around and seeing a train, and it's like seeing it before you hear it. It doesn't matter. By the time you see the train, that it's you're done. And so
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
it's like, oh no, we can spot this thing. It's glowing at 8,000 degrees. Well, by the time you see that, man, unless you've got like a Sprint ABM missile, that thing's coming right back in, and you're donezo.
Have you ever seen a Sprint takeoff on the
Yes. Oh
internet?
my God. Yes.
Oh my God. It just mind boggling.
I I have tried to get so many people into the Sprint ABM, people that don't even like missile, like my older brother, who's like a software guy, he's a meathead. I send him videos. I'm like, Charlie, I'm like, look at the Sprint ABM. And he's like, why the hell are you texting me this video from the 1960s? It's 3 a.m. Like, what do you want? And I'm like, look at the speed. And
Yeah.
he's like, all
What do you
right,
mean
man.
it's 3 a.m? You should be ready to wake up and look at missile stuff. What kind of
I know.
software engineer are you?
Exactly. I'm like, do you not understand it? The 100 G's of resistance it's going through. It's 0 to Mach 10, and it's all right, man. For everybody listening, Google or go to YouTube. Sprint ABM, the anti-ballistic missile. It was for like last second interception. This thing would take off. I mean, it kind of looks like when you see those old like 1903 videos from Times Square, and it's a bunch of horses, and they're all kind of sped up in some weird, for whatever reason, that's what the old film does. It looks like it's sped up. Like it looks like it looks like shitty like special effects from like the 30s. It's just sped up, but that's actually in real time. It's absolutely insane. But to kind of pivot from that, you talked about something that I hadn't been able to find anywhere else, that I first heard about in Garrett Graff's Raven Rock, and it's the ERCS, which to me is like the coolest part of the whole missile program. Is I don't want to. I Could you please explain that to my listeners what ERCS is? The
Emergency Rocket Communication System. I happen to have been able to find the guy who developed it, who was a program manager for SAC. And so I have more than I had to cut a bunch of the detail that he wrote for me, because at some point you can't have every knob and control described. But what they did was they took, I think, a total of 6 by the end of the program, silos at Whitman Air Force Base, and they replaced the Mark 5 RV or Mark 11 RV with one modified that looks exactly the same, but had a radio system, which is actually on display at the Smithsonian. You can look at the ERC's components. And what it would do is launch up over the United States, or one trajectory was more towards Europe to help with the European forces. It would launch up to an altitude I don't recall, and it would broadcast a tape recorded message, which was the launch code for that day. So if the SAC was destroyed, they'd launch these things up, and that would allow the launch control centers to have a signal to launch, orders to launch.
It's what I love. Uh it'd be like if no one had their car keys in a parking lot, and someone took like a Nerf football and put like a master car key on it that unlocked everything, and they threw it across the whole parking lot like a Walmart parking lot. As it went over, it would unlock everything, and it was for everything else fails. It's sort of
But it
the
didn't launch anything. It just gave
yeah, yeah.
the code for the day
Well, that's
or
that's
the week.
that's what I
And
mean.
that could be recorded by a capsule, could record that not on their own whim, but of course they'd get instructions, and a capsule would the launch officers would read the code in, then it would play back to verify.
Hmm.
So it was really extraordinary piece of equipment.
It's it's one of my favorite things. Just the redundancies upon redundancies is just I've always loved that about Strategic Air Command. Um, but something kind of confused me about it was in the vein of like Doctor Strangelove. Why did you keep it a secret? You're supposed to tell the whole world, right? That's the point of the doomsday weapon, is you let everyone know it's there. It's a deterrent that way. Why was the ERCS so tightly kept secret?
Well,
I feel like it would be you would want the enemy to know that no matter what, we're gonna get our
well,
stuff off.
but if they know which silo, which launch facilities the missiles are in, they may target those first.
Sure,
In which case, as soon as the backup capability is wiped out. I mean, if
sure.
I was the Soviet Union, I would have targeted those first
Mhm,
immediately. And
mhm.
so they would have wiped that out. The SAC bases are wiped out, and all of a sudden the missiles have old information to launch on.
Very true. Well, of course, you are the master on it. It's
Well,
definitely like,
I
come on.
know the masters on it. Let's put it that way.
Nonsense. I will not accept that as an acceptable answer. You are the master. It's
Did you see the reviews on Amazon? There's one guy who wrote a review that the book was written too early and I'm a moron. I'm an academic striving for my own personal gain.
the
That was
hell?
actually the first review written,
What?
accepted by Amazon. The other 12 or 13 are very highly commendable, but that one stopped me from having 5 stars. I have 4.5 stars because of that, pardon the French, moron. He or she obviously A, didn't read the book, or B, wished they'd written it and they're pissed that they didn't.
It's the latter. That's what
But
it
I'll
is.
tell you something, Tom. It's an interesting thing. I have a book on Operation Argus, the launching of the nuclear weapons into outer space to create an artificial radiation belt. And the guy did a very, what I want, it's a brief job of annotating or citing references. I mean, 30% of the Minuteman book are just taken up by the references
Yeah.
because the point is 10 years, 20 years from now, if someone reads the book, they're going to know where it came from. And the National Air and Space Museum has an archive, Wright-Patterson has an archive, and Space Command has an archive, and so does Vandenberg. So there's no excuse for people not being able to get to it because it's all unclassified.
Yeah. Yeah. It's yeah, no, whoever left that comment, it's what it is that's an angry person. Sometimes I'll have people leave comments on my channel. I feel like I'll do an awesome interview, and someone will be like, "This guy sucks. What a moron. This guy's a dipshit."
Yeah,
And what I always kinda ask them, sometimes they'll email me, and I'll just email them back, and I'll just say, like, "Is everything okay at home?" Like, I won't know who it is. I'll be like, "Is everything
yeah.
okay?" More often than not, some people just say, "Everything's fine, fuck you." Excuse my French. Some of them, they open up, and they're like, "Dude,
Huh.
my dog just died. I'm sorry. I got drunk last night and left an angry comment." You'd be surprised how many people just if you just say, "Are you alright, man?" They
Yeah.
just
Well, good
they
for you. Good for you. No, the thing that bothered me most was totally baseless comment
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a nothing. I may be well known in Minuteman and Titan circles, but for the most part, no one knows or cares who I am, which is
I
that's
do.
fine with me. I didn't write it for personal gain, but one thing I did run into, and not so much in the Titan 2 book, but with the Minuteman book, was the idea of who's this clown writing this book? He wasn't in the program. Why is he writing it? I stayed out. I don't belong to Facebook. I have no intention to belong to Facebook. But the reason I stayed out of it was one, I'm not from Minuteman, so I'm not going to convince this person that I should have written the book. And two, if you want to do so much about writing the history of Minuteman, write the damn book yourself. Most people, I have a book on cruise missiles that's beautifully illustrated, stunning photographs. There's photographs of Regulus that I never saw, which kind of saddened me because I thought I had the best collection. But there are absolutely no references, no citations of where the information came from. So you have no idea
Yeah.
if the guys made this stuff up. Most of what he wrote was true, but if you open that book, I opened it hoping to find new reference material on Regulus.
Yeah.
Nah,
Yeah.
that's just lazy.
Yeah. Well, that's what I love about your books is, I mean, they are, a lot of authors, they do a good job at staying unbiased. You go above and beyond. Yours truly is a like what you do, your books, the two I've read, are for lack of they are autopsies. They are
Yeah,
apolitical, unbiased, unemotional autopsies. And
that's
it's
a very,
amazing.
very interesting description because my idea was to write Regulus was the first one, and I wrote. I know a lot of people thought Regulus was a waste of money in hindsight. So my decision in writing any of these books is I write them as if it's there and then instead of here and now.
Mhm.
Sure, it's easy to say Minuteman, well, Regulus should never have been built because Polaris worked so well. But if the Polaris hadn't worked so well, we'd
Yeah.
be screwed.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
hindsight is, and the stories in Titan 2 and in Regulus, people look at that and go, they really did that back then? I can't believe it. Like Roy Pearson riding on the wing of Regulus 1 during the initial taxi tests. I mean, they wouldn't even think of doing that now.
Mhm.
I met and interviewed Roy, wonderful guy, a test pilot that just loved what he did and did what was necessary.
Mhm.
So you could say in hindsight, the guy's an idiot, but back in the day, they needed this thing to be tested and work and be ready to deploy.
Mhm.
So,
Well,
but
yeah.
Minuteman's the same way in terms of the propellant story.
Yeah. Yeah.
The propellant story, much to my surprise, no one's complained about the title of the chapter that says From Polaris Came Minuteman. If you really do the research, which I did, you can easily demonstrate, much to the Air Force's chagrin, that the propellant breakthrough came due to Navy um, funding and work, not Air Force. Even though Ed Hall would argue, he's passed away now, but he would argue that he designed everything. He didn't. There are a lot of other very sharp people involved in this.
Mhm. And the importance of Minuteman, if I'm correct, was that with the liquid fueled rockets, not only were they were dangerous in that if you messed up through human error, you know, we talked about that last time with how lethal
Right.
Titan was. And I've listened to our past episode, and I actually wanted to touch on something I said when I was describing how the guy died from when they were wiping it down with Freon because it wasn't lifting out the noxious fumes, and you pointed out it wasn't designed to. When I say Titan II or any of these missile systems are danger aside from the obvious thermonuclear warhead, when I say they're dangerous in the same way that I've had on a friend several times. He's a skydive instructor, does base jumping, wingsuiting, and he says the equipment does not fail. The mean failure time is like a billion, truly is like a billion jumps.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's it's people that misuse it are the ones that go into the side of a cliff.
Right.
So to if I could go back and just for retroactively, when I say Titan 2 was a lethal system, it's lethal if you do not use it correctly. My air conditioning system's lethal if I go suck the freon out of the machine.
Well,
Well,
if you're stupid enough to be have a lit cigarette in your hand when you fuel your car, it isn't the manufacturer's fault.
not
It isn't
ExxonMobil.
gasoline's fault. It's your fault for being just stupid.
It's Darwin. Yeah.
It's Darwin
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Um, but so about Minuteman, it its importance, and this is all still new to me, was that let's say during Titan 2, if the president said, you know, launch, it would actually take, I mean, it would take what, a couple hours to get it ready
No,
to
no, no,
launch for Titan?
no.
Or was that was
Titan Atlas 1 and Atlas and all the variations of Atlas and Titan 1 were liquid propellant. And they needed to come to the surface and be fueled in about 15 minutes to get the LOX, the liquid oxygen on board. So that's 15 minutes of exposure to and then not being able to launch. Titan 2 launched within to turn the keys and launch and actually get out of the hole, I think was around 5 minutes. I don't remember the details.
okay.
Minuteman One was launched in 58 seconds.
That's so I was which I normally always do. I guess that's my trademark is horribly exaggerate. So not several hours, but even 15 minutes or 30 minutes, 5 minutes. Well, when a Soviet ICBM can hit in 30 minutes, that's a big amount of time. Did we detect it right away? So is it actually going to be here in 30 minutes or is it going to be here in 27 minutes?
Well, if it's a submarine launched cruise
Well,
missile
yeah.
or submarine launched ballistic missile off the coast of California,
Oh
it's going to
yeah.
be more like 5 or 10 minutes.
Exactly. So there's
So
a
it's as fast as we could logically do it.
yeah.
Um, that's why it was called Minuteman. It could respond in a minute. That's not actually why it was named that, but you could argue that
Yeah.
Minute Man, it's actually just picked kind of out of the sky. The original description Ed Hall used was System Q. And the reason he did that was he was very jealous of other agencies in the government. And he didn't want people to know what he was designing until he popped it on them. They were going to use Sentinel, but that turned out not to be the choice, and Minuteman was used instead.
I love Minuteman. Well, because in that when minutes matter, when it's not 1940 and you're sending over a wave of 10,000 bombers and it's going to take hours to get there, and yeah, a lot of them are going to get shut down, but you're going to get through. When Eisenhower, the whole continuity of government plans, the helicopter evacuations, the relocation arc so that you could get underground, because it would all happen in a matter of minutes. The SLBMs off the coast of Washington D.C., it does matter when you're getting down. It's like kind of like an F1 like Formula racer car, and you'll see them and they're like putting on hubcaps made out of like carbon fiber, and it's like these are cost $1 million each, and it's like, why the hell do you need $1 million hubcap? And it's, oh well, it shaves off about 2 milliseconds, and it's like, well, why do you need it? Because that's what the race comes down to. And
Yeah.
Minuteman, there was an actual huge advantage to being able to launch in under a minute as opposed to 5 minutes or 15. That's a lifetime when it's mutual assured destruction via reentry vehicles carrying megatons of
Well,
death.
Titan II, to turn the keys, get the message and turn the keys took about a minute, but the actual liftoff took time for the engines to ignite and cause the acceleration to lift it out of the hole.
Mhm.
So, it's an amazing, to me, what fascinated me about all these books that I've written is the technology behind it. For
Yeah.
someone to come up with, I still inertial measurement units still just blow me away that
Oh, yeah.
you can tell where it's going to the accuracy that it can do now. And one of the problems Minuteman faced and Titan II faced, although I'm pretty sure they didn't fire a Titan II south, um, there were some naysayers. There are always academicians that scientists and whatever that would say we've never launched one over the pole, so we don't know if it's going to hit what it should hit. And Stark Draper, who was maybe the one of the people that was involved in as a inspiration for Iron Man, because there is a Draper lab, and his name was Charles Stark Draper. Anyway, he assured everybody that, and this guy was very smart. I mean, scary smart.
Yeah.
He assured all the naysayers that if launched over the poles, yes, we had enough satellite information to know the gravity anomalies. Yes, that was all programmed to take care of. Yes, it would hit and go off and destroy its target. But in order to prove some of the naysayers a little more um, obvious, they launched south to a place called Oino Island, which wasn't directly south, but it was so much further south azimuth than the launches to Kwajalein and Awatok. And it landed accurately enough to show that, yes, with the nuclear weapon it carried, it would do the job.
Yeah, there's a there's some similarities in I think it was with the U-2, the fuel it used. It was one of the components of it was, I think this was from Ben Rich's Skunk Works. Um, the fuel it would use was also used in a bug repellent, and they used so much of it one year in the 50s that there was actually a shortage of bug repellent that summer, but it was classified as to why. So they just, oh, there's a shortage, and it was just
Yeah.
no one knew
Well,
that this super secret. So with
yeah.
Minuteman, the transistors that at one point they were, or the was it the transistors? I'm technologically illiterate. The motherboard, whatever it was, it used 90% of the nation's supply of computer
Yeah.
chips.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Computer back when they started using the computer chips. And it's interesting, the computer chips varied from ceramic wafers, which had the components deposited on them, smaller scale than discrete components, but still much bigger than
Mhm.
integrated circuits. But when Apollo went to the moon without computer chips, in the sense that we know them as integrated circuits as we know them today. Um, but yeah, Minuteman, in many ways, Minuteman, the Air Force, and I guess probably Polaris as well, but certainly Minuteman, um, fueled the semiconductor industry. Without the demand they placed, and not only the demand, and that's the easy thing to think about, but the quality control.
Mhm.
The companies initially resisted the cost of the quality control because it was exorbitant in their mind. It was easier to throw out defective chips,
Yeah.
defective transistors than it was to try and figure out why. And then when the Air Force said, sorry, you're going to need to tell you, not only do you need to check what went wrong, but you need to find out why it went wrong and how to fix it.
Yeah.
And that made Minuteman reliable parts, highly sought after, and ended up being cheaper than the original production because they weren't throwing them out.
Mm-hmm. That's absolutely amazing. It makes me think of Project Pluto, Pluto Slam, the nuclear powered cruise missile. You know, the flying crowbar they wanted to make in the 50s, and
That
they
was Slam. That was a Regulus,
oh
essentially going to be Regulus 3.
oh I didn't know that.
I interviewed the, I don't remember, Walters, his first name. I interviewed the guy. He wanted me to spend a lot of time in the book discussing Slam, but there wasn't much I could talk about. Yeah, it was a naked reactor. They wouldn't land them. They'd launch them near Eureka, California. So if there's a failure to go into the Pacific, it would run its test mission. Then they'd crash it into the Pacific because there's no way they could have that thing spewing radioactive exhaust
Mm-hmm.
come into land. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah, I know they used beryllium oxide, beryllium trioxide. It was the fuel sources, the hexagonal. They said they looked like a cross section of a pencil, the little fuel rods. And
mhm.
one of the companies they used was Coors because they had ceramics and can making down pat. They used the beer company.
Beryllium would have been a neutron absorber. It wouldn't have been the actual propellant.
Okay. Well, then
Still,
whatever it was, maybe
one
that would
thing,
have.
the aluminized propellant was a wonderful material and makes for that glow that Minuteman's so famous for,
Mhm.
and Polaris, Poseidon, and Trident. They wanted to use beryllium because it had a slightly, I think, substantially higher specific impulse,
Mhm.
but it was so toxic they couldn't use it down in the atmosphere. But they do use it for the kick motors for a lot of the satellites and space probes because it's up in orbit.
Yeah.
Who cares? But
Yeah. Yeah.
they did test fire several of the propellant mixtures with beryllium
Mhm.
out on San Nicolas Island, and that was probably would not happen nowadays.
It's insane. The quality control, yeah, is I know at Coors they did something, I forget what it's called. It was the something blue test, and they'd put this like transparent liquid on it, and then if you shined a blue light on it, you could see cracks, and that
Yeah,
was their quality control. But they used
they have
Coors.
a they have a fluorescein leak crack detection system the same
Mhm.
way. It'll accumulate in the crack, then you shine a UV light on it and
Mhm.
it glows.
Yeah.
Same idea. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Another interesting thing was, I mean, I feel like if you actually wanted to, I mean, if you just had an infinite amount of time, I think that your books could actually, like, if you just like let it run wild, like let's say you just had 1,000 years on Earth, I think your books could actually morph into like a history of man because you can tell where you had to like cut off the burrowing of like more information because you get down into the antimicrobials that they used on the surface because it's underground. Is it moist? Is it you can't have bacteria and fungus getting in there? And you go down to there, the manufacturers of that, where these things are coming from, and you can kind of tell where you almost had to like put your foot down and be like, okay, we're not going to go into like the backstory of the CEO of the fungus manufacturer,
Yeah.
but you could let
That
it
was
run forever.
that was one of my most difficult tasks because I'd get down to a detail that fascinated me. There's a lot of stuff that's not in the book because one of the reviewers said, this is great stuff, but you're detracting from the story. That's why I put so much in the digital appendices
Mm-hmm.
because there has to be a thread. I didn't write the book in any kind of chapter order. I
Yeah.
started with reentry vehicles,
Yeah.
then went to solid propellant. And then I said, whoops, I got to start the front of the book and
No,
operations. And it
no, you
was,
don't. No, you don't. Stop reading the reviews. Your books are fantastic. Stop. The people that are writing reviews are the people that took the time to sat down to read your book. And those people are reading the book because they want to learn about it. They want to learn about it because clearly they don't know about it. That being said, they don't know about it. You do know about it. Stop reading the reviews, man. It's Tom Brady doesn't listen to the fans. Tom Brady goes out and wins another Super Bowl. Your books
Yeah.
are on point. Stop reading the review. I leave glowing reviews. You can probably tell because I'm just like, this is amazing. I sound like a moron, but don't read the reviews, man. Your books are fantastic. The depth and the quality is what makes them stand out. You know, there are a million books on the Cuban Missile Crisis. There are a million books on the
So
JFK
many of them,
assassination.
so many of them. There's one thing that really destroyed me, and there's the reason my book is so thoroughly researched, is people reference another book to another book to another book.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't bother to go and find the primary reference. All
Mm-hmm.
my references to the Cuban Missile Crisis are from copies of the original histories from the Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
They're not quoting Scott Sagan's book or somebody else's book.
Mm-hmm.
And Sagan wrote a book about limits of safety, about problems with nuclear weapons and how they could have almost gone off. And he's talking about the quality control of the access of the codes during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and says that any one crew member could have launched a missile. Totally incorrect.
Yeah.
But he didn't look at one document that I found, which he should have been able to find, which clearly describes how the control of these sensitive materials. He made some guesses, and the guesses he made were based on what the story he wanted to tell. And that's what just drives me nuts. If I didn't understand or had a question, I'd clearly say to someone, say in the book, the final information on this has proved elusive, and then just end it there.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you do that several times. There's no and I speculate there are some things that the sentence almost comes to an end because it's just further documents are classified, and it just goes to the next paragraph, and it's like, I don't know what it is, so I'm not going to say what it is. That's
exactly one of the things that I've not seen yet, and I think the book's been out long enough. It's sold over. They've issued over 1,000 copies, but some of that's comp copies. So the last I heard, there were 950 sold in 3 months, which the publisher is very excited about. But
yeah.
So far, I've seen no review that says I've gotten anything wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
they can't because there's nothing wrong. You're just citing
there's only 2 pages that have typos, and those will be corrected after the first 2,000 books are gone.
Okay.
And that's their typos, my mistakes. But other than that, no one else has said, on page 15, there's this stupid mistake. So,
hey,
which is good.
If it's kind of like when someone attacks you if you ever have like a debate or an argument and someone, it's like, look at me. If someone said, well, Tommy, you have a gap tooth, it'd be like, well, that now means that you can't meet my argument. So instead of bringing up facts to fight my argument, you put, Tommy, you're really white. It's okay. Well, thank you. So when someone says, you have a typo on page 11, that's because they couldn't find any factually incorrect data in 400 pages. Yeah. That's what it means.
Well, what surprised me was the gentleman who found it was a very good friend of mine, my severest but quite honest critic. And he had to look up a fact using my book, and the page he selected had the wrong George Bush. And instead of the 10th Strategic Missile Squadron, it was the 310th, which is clearly wrong. And he's right. The one page he looked at had the error in it. So, and this is what kills me about this particular individual. He said, if this page is wrong, how much else is wrong in the book? And it was like, thanks for seeding that.
Thanks,
so
sir.
I took the final page proof, and I did a search for 310, and I found it in one other place. So it wasn't peppered throughout the book. And the people that were at Malmstrom will know it's a mistake.
Yeah.
And if they want to whine about it, try writing something with over 200,000 words in it and have it be perfect.
Yeah.
It's not a simple task.
What these commenters want is they want to live in your head rent-free, and you can't give that to them. That's what they want. They want to know that they got in your head. So don't give it to them.
That's why I didn't join the blog and try and argue with the commander, retired commander, who asked why this clown was writing the book. Well, there's no way I'm going to commit. They're not going to say, well, David, you're right. You're absolutely right. I should have written the book and I didn't, so it's my fault. They're going to say, you're a loser because you weren't in the program.
Yeah. Yeah.
Most important to me there were several reviewers and friends who helped me with data in the book. specifically the guy who did the Irks and some other people. And when they said the book was, what was the word? Glorious. I had several people write me and say the book is an absolute glorious description of the Minuteman program. And if they don't fund the replacement, which you never know, then this book is going to be the final say in Minuteman's history. Because at the end of it, I talk about the deactivation and the fact that it's going to be replaced. So if it doesn't get replaced, they're still going to have to deactivate it because there's just simply not enough of the missiles for test launches.
Mhm.
And then one could argue, and I think pretty reasonably, that do we really need 400 missiles to launch against Russia or China? No. In my not so humble opinion, we could have 100.
Yeah.
Or we could just rely on the subs.
Yeah.
Well, but the fear in the submarine industry world is that somebody's going to break through with something that makes the oceans transparent.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, they aren't.
Yeah.
And the evidence for that is they can't find that Malaysian aircraft. That just boggles my mind. They can't find that. I watched a documentary on that. I can't remember the flight number. That Air France
37. Malaysia's 370.
Right. No, the other one was 447 or something. It was an Air France flight from Brazil that ran into that thunderstorm, and the pitot tubes froze over, and the guys reacted. And what happened was the pilots, again, the aircraft did have a problem with the pitot tubes frozen over, but they reacted incorrectly and stalled the aircraft, went into a flat spin and hit the water. But they finally found it after several years of looking. I just find it. I don't think they found it and are hiding it. Oh, by the way, that's that Indonesian submarine. I think they found some debris floating on the surface.
Yeah, I think they're for everybody listening today, it's Saturday, April 24th, 2021, for historical purposes. Yeah, a submarine went missing a couple days ago, and I think they said it had a max depth of like 300 feet, and I think the last message they got was from 700 feet. So I think they're probably.
Well, it's funny. The Malaysian said a crack developed in the and this stuff leaked out. Yeah, it's called catastrophic failure crack.
Yeah, it's kind of like
you don't have cracks in submarines. You have failure.
It's kind of like what Elon Musk calls explosions. Rapid unscheduled disassembly. No, it's an explosion. You don't have a crack in a submarine. Oh,
what was funny was I just read a small article that another four-man crew launched on a reused Falcon booster and a reused Falcon, reused Dragon capsule successfully yesterday. I guess yesterday or Thursday, to the space station. So it's getting so routine now that they're just, I love it.
I love it. Keep pushing it forward. Keep pushing it forward.
Yeah. Well, it's like Perseverance, watching that thing land with that sky crane concept.
Mm-hmm.
I think the helicopter is kind of a stunt, but Perseverance and the thing's the size of a bus.
Yeah.
It amazes me what they can do.
It's beautiful. It's to circle back to the ocean. Yeah, that's one thing that's always boggled my mind is that like we have mapped the surface of Mars with orbiters, but we still haven't mapped the entire ocean floor. I mean, it took
one thing about the ocean that as a young man I wanted to be involved in but didn't was I am really surprised and disappointed they didn't spend the money on developing ocean technology like they did space flight.
Yeah.
There's somewhere we got 70% of the surface of the earth is covered by water. And that means there's 70% of the earth is probably relatively unexplored. Yeah. Now, the fact that it's really deep, okay, it's really deep. Is it high pressure? Okay, so space is no pressure.
Yeah. So, we went to the moon. Like, yeah.
We should be able. We should have habitats that are colonizing the ocean floor. Of course, there has to be a reason for it. And mining. I'm old enough to remember the Howard Hughes, the fake story of the Glomar Challenge Explorer, whatever it was.
Yeah, when they went and picked up Titanic, or not picked up. Sorry,
they went looking after the
Russian sub. Yeah, sorry.
And one of the Regulus boats was involved in that. Halibut, after she got renovated from being a Regulus boat, she was involved in finding the actual debris field.
Yeah. It's for everybody listening, that was Howard Hughes, was publicly funded to go explore the Titanic. What it actually was is he was being paid by the CIA. I can't remember the name of the program.
No, it wasn't the Titanic. It was a drilling. The original design
Okay.
was ocean mining. They were going after nodules of manganese as a
Okay.
possible way to easily mine the depths of the ocean. And that was a cover story for the actual
Okay.
system.
Well, so they went in, and what they were actually doing was they were trying, I think they wanted to pick up a Soviet submarine that had sunk. I think
Yeah,
was it the Kursk?
the guy who designed the assembly for picking it up was the same guy who designed the assembly for recovering the reentry vehicle off of the Aaron launch N7 off of Vandenberg, and I interviewed the guy.
Really? Oh, yeah, it's in Annie Jacobson's Surprise Kill Vanish. There's this guy Billy Waugh who, I mean, he went and fought in Iraq in his 70s. Like this guy, he'd been in everything from Korea through the Iraq War. Was a CIA agent. I mean, like the inspiration for James Bond. But he said one of his favorite. He's in his 90s now. One of his favorite things was he had such high clearance and had just proven himself over decades to just, red, white, and blue through and through. They had no security questions with him. They put him out, just him, in a little dinghy out in, I think, Kwajalein or wherever, and they would have him kind of circle the area of where the MIRVs would hit because they were detecting Soviet subs nearby, and they didn't want the Soviets to go out and try to get a piece of it. So there's just Billy Waugh out there with like an M16 and a dinghy, just like he was circling the area.
It's interesting you mentioned that because I do have one or two references to an unidentified submersible in the Kwajalein lagoon, but I could never find a primary reference to that, and I decided I didn't want to. I cut a lot of it out. There's a lot of UFO stuff about Minuteman that I didn't use because I couldn't find authoritative sources. Now, some could argue the Air Force wouldn't have it, but that would be too easy to detract from the science of the book, was to have speculation about it.
Yeah, you don't want to put. In full disclosure, I love UFOs. That's my guilty pleasure. But you don't want to put that in something as documented and respected, and really, I think, an authority for the ages on missile systems as your books. I think that would taint it. I think that would give people too easy. Make it so good that they can only attack you on typos. Don't give them free fuel.
Right, that's kind of what I thought.
Yeah, don't give them ammo.
Because I believe the people that described the incidents are not making it up, but I don't have an explanation.
Sure.
And so, but you're right. I decided that if I put that in, someone would go, UFOs, this guy's a nutcase, and then the book would get a bad reputation. So
yeah, don't give them any ammunition. They're already frothing out the mouth. They're like, this book shouldn't have been written. Don't throw them a knife. They're gonna come at you with it. Not that you need my advice. You're the author, not me. I want to say is, I got you for 15 more minutes. You remind me of Richard Rhodes. I've only read 3 of his books. Making of the Atomic Bomb.
That's quite a compliment. Yeah.
Yeah. I and that's how I mean it. Making of the Atomic Bomb. My favorite of his, Dark Sun, Making of the Hydrogen Bomb.
Yeah.
And I think his book Energy, which is like the 1700s to like nuclear power. It's actually very fascinating. That's the only, when you go back, my favorite chapter is chapter 7 of Dark Sun, is when he goes into the actual construction of IV Mike. And he goes in, he's naming all the different waxy polyethylene, purple, black uranium, a breath of tritium, liquid deuterium. And he's going into just every little, and how it, instead of just saying, and then they pressed explode, he's like, they pressed the button, which sent the signal to the capacitors, which discharged, which caused an and he goes into the atomic level, and it takes him like 15 minutes to explain a millionth of a second. But that is what your writing style reminds me of, is you go in and you're like, they had this many, they had this computer chip with this many transistors and this many lines of code, and that caused this thing, which was sheathed with copper to cause like fins to come out and stabilize. And you just go in, and it's like when you go to like a Golden Corral buffet, just like a pig, and you just stuff yourself, and you leave not only do you not want any more, but you're sick. You're like, that's enough. I've had enough. You finish Minuteman or Titan, and you're like, I now have enough of that forever. There's so much information.
Well, one of my next door neighbors, he wanted the book, and he forced me to let him buy it from me. And so I've asked him twice how he likes the book, and he just looks at me and shakes his head. He's a computer guy. The interesting thing you mentioned about the computer chips, and the first computer had a certain number of diodes and this and that, and the number of transistors, resistors was like 400 and 509. And I looked at that and I thought, that can't possibly be right.
Yeah.
So I went and found the original description of the computer from
512.
It was 5,994.
Oh, okay.
5,094 because someone dropped the 4. But that reminds me of the story about Titan II. When we first gave there were two things about it. The most important one that we needed to correct was people said 6 feet of soil on the silo closure door and it could still open. And I looked at that and I thought, I'm pretty sure that's wrong. So when I looked and because it just was that much soil, a foot of soil across 400 square feet is a lot of weight.
It's heavy.
So I went back to the original design documents, which, believe it or not, we had, and it was 6 inches. But one of those hash marks was gone, so it promulgated as 6 feet.
Yeah, which is
that's the kind of. So when I found out about the resistors, I didn't say it in the text. I just end noted, and if you look at the end note, it says the actual number is 5,094.
Yeah. That's another thing is, that's what I wrote down. Now, if I'm correct, Titan didn't have this, but Minuteman did, and they had these sort of like buckets over the silo that would catch. So let's say there was a nearby nuclear explosion, and it would displace this much material, and it would change it. Some of it would be bladed, some of it would be melted. But if there was a nearby hit, which obviously is a possibility, more than likely they're going to try to hit those silos, is it would blow all that junk onto the silo. So what they had is like almost like little baskets or buckets or whatever the hell it was.
They were called bins, debris bins. That was a retrofit into the program.
Yeah.
And, I thought that was a stroke of genius because there's something called the angle of repose. The reason piles of dirt have a certain, depending on the material, they have an angle of repose, and it may be this and maybe this, depends on the material and its cohesiveness. And so when you open the silo closure door in Titan II or the launch facility closure door, launcher closure, when you move it, if there's a foot of soil over the opening, then on either side of the opening was a bin, and that bin would spring open at the same time or slightly before the debris started to fall. Now, obviously, if it was a foot thick or 2 feet thick, that it's still classified what the depth of soil. But the interesting thing about it is, for Minuteman, the only thing they'd have to worry about really was it dinging the reentry vehicle, because the sides of the missile, even though they had the ablative cork on them, there wasn't a tank to puncture like there was with the Atlas or Titan 1 or 2.
Yeah, that's what.
That's the detail because it was as a Titan docent, there was a gap of about, when the silo closure door opened, there was a gap of about, I'm just going to say roughly 2 feet. And I always wondered why it didn't just open right away to the opening for the launcher. And that was because that was the space that the debris would fall down. And the other thing that was important with Titan II was Titan II had a much larger diameter than the missile. So if debris fell down, it was likely to fall on the very outside of the outer rim instead of near the middle. But with Minuteman, it was a 6 foot diameter silo, and I think it was not 12 feet diameter silo, and a 6 foot diameter missile, a 5 foot diameter missile. So you had 3.5 feet on either side. So there was some room for the debris to cascade down without hitting the missile itself.
Titan.
One of the fascinating things about Minuteman was the fact that when it left the launcher, if you find a film that's fast enough speed, the missile's on fire because the ablative corks caught on fire.
That's another thing you talked about in the design is they had to write the exhaust plume of the W or the J shape or whatever kind of duct they had. that actual plume upon takeoff, they had to have a certain heat resistant or heat retardant coating because that was super hot, right? The big ball of fire
Well,
that would go through
yeah,
it.
unlike Titan, Titan 1 and 2 and Atlas, there wasn't a flame bucket.
Hmm.
They did some very early testings, and I was able to find some really wonderful photographs of this, which actually made it into the book. Took quite a while to get the photograph to be a high enough quality, but it's a microfilm of a microfilm. Anyway, there's an annulus around the missile that the flames went up. So instead of being exhausted, ducted away from the missiles like in Atlas and Titan 1 and 2, the flame just went up with the missile. So for a brief second, it was under quite a bit of heat stress.
Hmm.
Then the flames would be extinguished once it accelerated to speed. But the missiles coming out of the hole, all of the Minuteman missiles coming out of the hole are burnt charcoal in color
Hmm.
because the cork has been burned
Yeah.
burnt out. Which
Yeah.
surprised me was something as mundane as cork was used. And not only that, they tested different thicknesses and they actually put on a pretty meager coating because they wanted it to absorb the heat, protect the missile, but they didn't want it to have a bunch of residuals. So actually it burns off almost to completion as it's going through the atmosphere. So there's
Okay.
not extra weight. And you think extra weight, big deal, something that is powerful. Made a difference at the end of the mission, how much
Over
weight was being carried.
Absolutely. Over 7,000 miles. I mean, it adds up, right?
Yeah, well, it's the range that I give for the Minuteman with the third reentry vehicle was in the neighborhood of 7,000 nautical miles. That's another thing that bothers me about some of the histories written by some really authoritative guys. They use the one launch of Atlas that went over 9,000 miles, um, and a launch that we're trying to do with Titan II, which would have gone over 9,000 miles. And they state that as the operational range. The operational range for Titan II was 5,500 nautical miles, period.
Hmm.
There wasn't anything longer. Yes, they could have put a Mark IV on it, and yes, it could have gone further, but they didn't.
Yeah.
So no, the operational range isn't 7,000 miles for Titan II with a Mark IV. It's 5,500 nautical miles with a Mark VI and fully loaded with decoys. But some really well-known historians quote the other, and it drives me nuts when they do that. But I think part of it is because they want to sell books.
Well, it's yeah, you gotta have that sexy number. You gotta have it can throw a 9 megaton warhead, this many. Yeah, you gotta yeah, that's what they want. But that's again, that's why I think you're the authority is I was gonna say it makes me think of the ablative coating they put on the X-15, that sort of pink eraser like coating, and how it actually like messed it up because some of it would stick and they had to put like a metal eyelid on one of the windows that they could open up. I don't know if you ever seen those old pictures, but it's this thing
No,
that yeah, they could like the pilot could like manually like crank something inside and the left there's two windows. The left window had a
oh,
metal eyelid. That's what they called it. And he could crank it up and open it in case the ablative material had basically covered the right eye because you can't be coming in at Mach 5, Mach 6, Mach
right.
7 and not see anything. But that
Yeah.
little tiny thing, an ablative coating, it's like it's a rocket being dropped from a B-52. What do you mean it does make a difference. And with a reentry vehicle, I mean, when you're trying to have that circular error probability, I mean, it adds up. It
Oh,
adds
sure
up.
it does. Sure
Yeah.
it does.
I mean, think of a
That's why
rifle.
that
Yeah.
that's why they had to work on a new nose tip because just a small imperfection. Now, if these things were flying through a nearby blast that still had debris in the air, they would have dinged the RV and they wouldn't have made it. But
Mhm.
that's why they had to wait until after the debris cloud settled before they launched. So there's a thing called pin down, where the Soviets or we would launch multiply timed missiles so the detonations would keep going off and you couldn't get the missiles out of the hole. That
Oh.
that takes a lot of missiles. Were there the 1,000 targets that Minuteman had to be targeted on? There were plenty of targets, but in my not so humble opinion, I think they were reserving them to be multiple hits on certain targets just to make sure A, the targets disappeared, and B, the bombs, the reentry vehicles made it through.
I
There
never
was overkill, and yeah, there was overkill in the 50s and early 60s.
but that's what it was. It's again, it's like you say, it's easy for us to look back at. That's what it was. There was no here's this brand new thing, we can shoot rockets without even leaving our country. Yeah, it's you
Yeah.
have to have multiple per targets. Are they gonna take us out? I never knew about that they would so you could kinda keep pounding the area around it and you throw all this material in the air.
Well, the material and radiation,
Yeah,
X-rays from the from the bomb going off. I mean,
yeah,
that's my supposition as a non-nuclear targeting guy, but that's one way to do it. The trouble is it takes a lot of missiles.
yeah. Well, that's right, that's what isn't that what they called the Great Plains was the ICBM sponge?
No, that's, I never heard that.
Yeah,
That's
I think
pretty good description.
I think it was LeMay. Someone described it as it's kind of like, kinda dark, but they're like, "Hey, they have to expend this much," right? It's like, I don't know, it's like having really thick gutters around your house. There has to be a lot of rain to overcome it.
Well,
That's
that's no, no, I never heard of it as the ICBM sponge, but that's, yeah. LeMay said at one point, they talked about radiation and debris and fallout, and whether that would be a problem with cities nearby. And LeMay just said, we can do so much, and then we got to build the damn things.
yeah, yeah,
It's like the design down the road. There are a lot of people saying, well, the missile's got this. If you have 99% probability of launch and
yeah,
99% probability of getting to the target, 99% probability of the RV going off, that multiplies out to be in maybe point 80%. And so people go, well, that's not very good.
it's
Well,
pretty good.
if you do the math, it's the best you can do.
Yeah, and if you've got 30,000 warheads and you can get 80% of them, I
That'll
mean,
probably do the trick.
it's yeah, and when you're throwing multi-megatons into orbit, I mean, at a certain point, you have to stand back and go, "It's pretty good," right? You know?
Yeah.
When you're
Well,
built
that's my point. At some point, they
Yeah.
just had to say, okay, we need to design these. We need to get them built.
Mhm.
Yes, it's in it. It's not going to be perfect. Yes, they might be destroyed by a nearby hit. The silos might be unaligned or misaligned because of a nearby hit. That's all very true. But my logic with that, and I didn't really say in the book, was if that happens, we've got bigger problems.
Yeah,
It's
exactly,
not going to matter if all the Minuteman missiles didn't get out of the hole because we've been hosed.
yeah, if you own a home on top of like a hill and you don't buy like flood insurance, you're like, well, if the off chance there is a 30-foot flood, man, I'm gonna be out $100,000. And it's like, dude, if there's a 30-foot flood, it means it's the biblical end times. There's
Well,
gonna
that's what I
be
talk about
yeah,
biblical events. It'll be a
yeah,
biblical event, and we're
yeah.
not going to have to.
You're
If
not gonna
there's that much snow and we can't launch, that's a biblical event that we have no control over.
yeah.
But it is interesting. I'm old enough to remember back in the day the bomb shelters being built.
Mhm.
I talked to my dad, and two things struck me. I remember about that. He said, "David, well, the first thing he did is one day. Have you ever heard of Gaines Burgers? It
No.
was a dog food that looked like a hamburger."
Oh, Jesus.
And we each got a chance to take a bite out of one because he said if there's a nuclear war, that's what we're going to have to eat. And I said, why don't we have a bomb shelter? And he said, David, if there's a nuclear war, there aren't going to be hospitals, there are not going to be roads, there's not going to be civilization as we know it. So why do we want to live to come up out of the ground
Yeah, you
to
don't.
see that? And I thought, well, that's kind of defeatist. And then I did a little bit of work on the math, even as a 12-year-old, and I thought they can't dig these things deep enough.
No.
And there's not enough oxygen. I don't care what kind of scrubbers you think you can afford. There's not enough oxygen and CO2 scrubbers. So coming to the surface after World War III, not
Yeah.
something I'm looking at. Well, coming to the surface after you bomb the crap out of something in the Bora Bora region of Afghanistan can't be a lot of fun either.
No. Well, yeah, if you're the president, the vice president, or in the Joint Chiefs of Staff, you've probably got a bunker that might be worthwhile. You might be able to have,
If
you
you
might
can get to it.
yeah,
And
if you can yeah.
in this day and age, by the time you're flying in a helicopter,
Yeah, it's
to
done.
me, the concussive wave from even a
Yeah.
conventional weapon going off is going to, but
It's that's the beauty of nuclear war is you have to come to this conclusion. There's nothing left. And there's one thing you do want in preparing for a nuclear war, and it's a handgun with a clip with enough ammo to shoot everyone you love and then shoot yourself.
well,
That's
that's a bit extreme, but I
it's
can't say I disagree.
what I am is I'm loosely quoting Eisenhower. During one of the drills in the 50s, Eisenhower said, He said, "You don't understand. People are going to be mad. They're going to be insane." He said, "The most humane thing you can do is to crawl out of your bunker, shoot everyone you meet, and then shoot yourself." That's Dwight D. Eisenhower from Garrett Graff's Raven Rock.
Oh,
That's the 5-star general saying that. I'm just rewording it.
yeah, yeah.
But in a sense, that's the beauty of it. Is that's why it can't be done, because everyone knows that's the outcome. I've kept you
Well,
for over an hour. I did want to ask you. I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget. The ending you talk about. Let me pull it up real quick. The ending. The ground-based strategic deterrent, GBSD. That's the replacement in 2030, correct? For the Minuteman.
currently, that's been programmed, and Northrop Grumman has a sole source contract for it, and Boeing, I think, has given up trying to compete with it.
Okay.
But it's a matter of whether they can afford the trillions of dollars versus the subs and the bombers.
Yeah.
I think there could be a point with this infrastructure where they say that money's got to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
But I have good friends that are working on it with Northrop Grumman, and so far they haven't been laid off. So we'll see.
It's probably a no, but is there any chance you think that they would do this podcast?
I think you're right.
99% of people I ask say no, so you can't hurt my feelings.
No, I think
Yeah.
several of them they're employed by Northrop Grumman, and
Yeah.
that's the kind of thing that a company like that, even if you're not spouting, even if you're a public. Well, for instance, the Titan II book was a Lockheed Martin advertisement for Titan II.
Mhm.
And Minuteman's basically an advertisement for those companies. Were there problems? Yeah. Were there some problems with the guidance system that caused a lot of stress in Congress? I mention it. I don't emphasize it, because
Mhm.
if you want to get an idea of problems, just think of Congress not getting the damn thing done most of the time. They'd be the first ones to complain and the last ones to admit guilt. So
Well, yeah, it's yeah. I called Northrop Grumman last summer, and I tried to get them to answer some questions about the B-21 Raider, the replacement to the B-2 Spirit.
sure.
I had my ear chewed off over the phone.
Wow.
Don't ever call back. Don't ever ask questions about that. Do you know what that is? Do you have? And I was like, they thought I was an employee, and they're like, that you're not to talk about that on like company lines. And I was like, my name's Tommy. I do a podcast. I just want to talk to you about it. And she was like, young man, like, do you know what you're asking? And I was like, there's YouTube videos about it, like on Northrop Grumman's channel.
Yeah.
And basically, without saying, it kind of told me to go F myself. And I took that as
I've been trying. What really amazed me is how much is still classified of Minuteman 1A and B.
that makes
The
it so
thing
much
isn't even
sexier.
deployed anywhere. It's just drives me nuts.
It's
Although
sexy.
I got the launch records for Minuteman 1A and B were unclassified. They were part of the information I used for the Titan II book.
Mm-hmm.
And then I tried to get the Minuteman 2, and we can't give you that. The Minuteman 3 was impossible.
That's what makes it sexy.
Yeah,
That's the beauty of it. I will let you go. I have kept you for over an hour, Mr. David Stump, the authority on missile books. Don't read the comments; those people suck. Get it if you have any interest in missiles, just get it. You don't even need to read the whole thing. Find a chapter on something that you're interested in and just get lost in it. It's fun. I enjoy it. It's fun to go down the rabbit hole and to just hear about this stuff and then when you hear they're talking about re-entry vehicles and latitude, longitude, and you're like, oh man, this is some high-tech stuff. And you're like, and they debuted it on January 2nd, 1960. And you're like, what the hell? And you're like, what, in the 60s? You're like, Jesus, 2 years before JFK was killed. But it really is fascinating. I highly recommend it to anybody. You. Absolutely. You don't have a say in the matter. You're going to come back on here a third time, and we're going to talk about Argus.
Oh, I'll have to read up on it. I don't know much about Argus.
How about
Regulus? Regulus.
I thought you said you wrote a book on Argus.
No, I wrote a book on Regulus.
No, you said earlier about a space.
Yeah. No, I'm reading a book.
Oh, I thought you said you wrote a book. Okay. Okay, we'll do Regulus.
Yeah, I'd like to do Regulus. That'd be fun.
Let's do Regulus. I'll grab it, and I think we'll do the same thing. I'll email you. We can work it out. But
Okay.
you don't have a say in the matter. As long as I have your ear, I have the master of missiles. I'm gonna ask you stupid questions until the cows come home.
Okay. Take care, Tommy. It's been a pleasure.
It always is. And lastly, stop reading those comments, man. Seriously, you
I
don't.
don't. I tell you what I am doing. I do have a graph because I'm the numbers nerd. I'm plotting the ranking and the ranking in three separate subclasses. And so far, I've been keeping pretty steady below 100,000 on the ranking, and in the hundreds or below 100 for the subclasses. And the publisher's very pleased. So
That's good. Don't listen to anything any of those people say. They suck. They just wanna get in your head. Don't
well,
listen.
if he'd had substantive complaint, I'd take it more seriously. But just to say it isn't, it's still active. Yeah, it's still active. Does that mean you can't write a history about the Prius because the Prius is still active? No, you write a book because it has history to give it.
Don't there's
So anyway,
there's a quote. There's a quote real quick. There's a quote, and it says, "If you stop and listen to every barking dog, you'll never get to your destination." So just you got books to write. You have a beautiful mind. Don't listen to the barking dogs. Just throw them some bacon and keep on going. It's awesome.
thank you.
Yes,
That's
sir.
great advice.
I'll send you an email. We'll do a Regulus episode. Everybody, the book will be in the description, sticking to the top comment. It's a fantastic read. I didn't understand half of it. You probably won't either, but it's a fun rabbit hole to jump down, and it's fun to learn about. Mr. David Stump, thank you so much, sir. God bless.
You're welcome.
You have a wonderful evening.
You too.